Hi guys, this is Nick Van Os, and I'm just making a quick video to show you how to set up iAscend 180. I just finished a video about iAscend, which is a version of this application that's made for IEP goals. So that version of the program is made to track progress on up to 7 IEP goals for one student. iAscend 180 is a little bit different. This is made more for pre-referral interventions, pre-referral intervention teams. So a group of, at this point, up to 50 students, if you need that, receiving a similar intervention, looking at a similar targeted skill. So it's not a single student with multiple goals, it's a bunch of students, each with one goal that we're monitoring. So where do you get to iAscend 180? This is obviously iAscend 180, the application built in Google Sheets, but how do you find that? I'm going to open a new tab and go to nickvanos.com. Okay, so let's navigate over to the iAscend menu here, and I would click on iAscend 180. That's going to take me to this page. What you'll see on here is a training tutorial presentation. It's just like PowerPoint, but from Google, and including a lot of screenshots. It's going to guide you through this entire setup process. So if you don't want to watch this video more than once, then I wouldn't blame you. This tutorial presentation is right there, ready to give you all the answers. Down here is the actual copy template that I put on the website. So you would click this arrow right here, and it will take you to this screen. So what you'll want is to click File up here on the menu and make a copy. And when you click Make a Copy, it's going to actually make a copy of the Google Sheet application, iAscend 180, and put that copy in your Google Drive. And you'll have your own copy that looks just like this. So I'm going to go to this demo folder that I had set up. So pretend that this is the copy that just got made. I would recommend keeping what I call a clean copy in your Google Drive. So unless you want to go back to my website every time you start a version of iAscend and make a new copy, just keep one in your Google Drive. It's a lot easier. So say I'm actually starting, it's the beginning of the year, I'm starting a pre-referral intervention group, and I want to monitor data for these students. What am I going to do? Well, I'm going to click right on here with the right key on my mouse, and I'm going to make a copy. So click that. And then this other file will pop up that says copy of intervention, iAscend 180. And I'll double click on that file, and it's going to take me to this. So just to go over that again one more time, you'll right click on the kind of template clean copy that you have and click make a copy. And that's going to give you a new copy, and that's the one that you're going to want to mess with. So the first thing that I always do when I open a new iAscend file is just rename it. So instead of copy of intervention, let's write what our intervention is. Maybe it's a check and connect intervention. And I'm just going to leave this as school year 17. That's how I typically like to name these files, just because they span a single school year. So that part is done. Now this is actually a lot easier to set up than iAscend 180. What you have here is a table, and it lists students 1 through 50, and then targeted skill, intervention number 1, and end of year goal. So when you fill out this table, it's done almost all of the work for you. So say student number 1 is John Lennon. So I've got my Beatles there. Generally, we're all going to be working on the same targeted skill for an intervention. So it might be reading fluency, it might be reading comprehension, math fact fluency. We're going to work on, let's say, multiplication fluency. All the Beatles are really bad at that. Okay, so I don't need to retype that 50 times. What I could do is just click on that little square at the bottom of the cell and just drag it down, and it's going to copy that down. The other thing you could do is just click on this cell, and if you click Control C at the same time on your keyboard, again, that's Control C, and I can actually, well, if I want to select all these cells, let's go over that a little bit more slowly. Click on this cell, Control C, copied it. I'm going to hold the Shift key, and click on the cell at the bottom. And then I've selected that entire column. I'll press Control V. It's going to copy that cell into every one of those cells, meaning that all of those interventions are now targeting the same skill. So that'd be a really quick way, again, for all 50 students to set up what skill you're targeting. It's doing some heavy labor right now because essentially what it's doing is copying that phrase multiplication fluency into all of those tabs, 100 tabs for 50 students. So that takes a little bit of computing power. All right, so now I'm going to do the same thing for intervention. Generally, again, I'm providing the same intervention for all these students, but let's click on that and write just some intervention title. So you can write absolutely whatever you want, but you can copy it down using the same methods that we had before. Again, I wanted you to have this flexibility when I was thinking about how to structure this to make that intervention slightly different for one student if you want to, or target a different skill if you want to. For example, you might have 50 students receiving the same intervention. Maybe it's Check and Connect, maybe it's a social skills group, and 49 of those students might be working on a specific skill. It's all the same. And one student might be working on a different skill. So you have that flexibility. The end of year goal, again, if you're using a benchmark, it might be the same for all of these students that might be in the same grade, aiming at the same benchmark. If you're looking at rate of improvement and you just want the students to make 20% progress on whatever they're working on from wherever they started, your goals might be the same or they might be different. For this one, let's pretend that they're different. So I can type whatever I want in there, and it's just going to make that my goal for the end of the year. Okay, so now that I've done that, and it's kind of messy, but I just wanted to explain how all of this works. Basically, this table feeds information into the rest of the program, all 100 other tabs it's feeding in. So let's go to student number 1. Okay, so you saw really quickly there, the program renamed targeted skill multiplication fluency. And instead of intervention 1, it says Saxon math 2 times a week for 30 minutes. So that's been renamed. Now let's scroll down to the end of the school year. And 30, there's our goal. Now, the reason why I didn't use that table to automatically set up the benchmark where the student is at the beginning of the year is you might benchmark the student on a different date. So you might grab that student on the second day of school and get their benchmark score and aim from there. But you also might have a delay or the student might come in mid-year. I just wanted you to have that flexibility. So say that we make it a week or so, and this is where we get a benchmark score. And it's 10. So I'm just going to enter that. I'm going to look at my chart. So iAscend 180 has taken all of that data and made it into this chart. So we have the name of the skill that we're working on, and we have our baseline score here, 10, and the score that we're aiming at for the end of year goal, which is 30. Now, unfortunately, there are 2 things that iAscend 180 won't do, and this is the same limitations that iAscend has. It won't rename this chart. Some teams that I've worked with have done that, and at the beginning of the year, they just set up all of those names for the students. Other teams haven't, because really, you have all of the names. Well, that was the wrong tab to click on. You have all the names here. So if you want to see what student 1, 2, 3, 4 is, you can see it there. And I'm going to click back to the tab that I just looked at. You also have it here. So when you're actually analyzing the data as a team, the names are right here. And you can see what student it is. So it's important and it's not important to have that on the actual graph itself. Personally, because I'm a pretty type A person, I like to rename the graphs if I have the choice. So let's do that and just see how it works. So student 1 is John Lennon, and we're going to say he's a ninth grader. Click enter. Our graph is renamed. Okay. The other thing that iAscend 180 won't rename automatically is the tabs down here. So if I want student 1 to say John Lennon, we would do that, and it is renamed. Okay, so now we've talked about the gray column right here. So that's again where we enter our information about the goal. So this is the skill that we're targeting. This is the benchmark or the baseline score, excuse me. And the end of the year is where we have our end of year goal. Now, what iAscend has done down here is actually calculate the slope between those 2 points. So when we looked at that graph, this is the slope that we're talking about. And mathematically, that's what the slope is. So we're not going to touch this column because we've already calculated our aim line. We're going to start putting our data into this column, and I'm just going to enter some arbitrary data. And I think we are going to be doing really well with this data. Check out what our graph looks like. So that's great. So our trend line slope is steeper. It's exceeding the aim line. So clearly projecting out the student is going to meet or exceed their end of year goal. And you see now we have the label for that intervention over here on the right. So let's look at the analysis tab to see what that actually does. So like I said, one of the reasons this is here is to give you a quick read on your trend lines versus your aim lines. So this is the mathematical slope of your aim line, the slope of the progress that we're expecting the student to make. And then this is the trend line slope. So what rate of progress the student is actually making. And when it's higher than this read of the aim line slope, and we think that the student is going to meet or exceed their goal, it's going to turn green. And the opposite is true. It's going to turn red when the trend line slope is down here. It's less steep. It's just dipping down here. Then we're going to see this turn red. So this is a month by month tracker. So you can actually see, for example, sometimes students will be green for a couple months and something changes and they start to turn red. So you don't lose that information. I mean, you could always look at the chart and kind of guess, like we had a couple points aiming up. The trend line was probably pointing up. But that analysis tab gives you a really nice preservation of, yeah, things were going good. They were green for a while and then they turned red. You have that detail for all 50 students. What is a very quick way of looking at a whole intervention is this compressed analysis table over here. So that gives you the current slope at this moment in time for each one of these students. And it doesn't look like much right now because we just have one student with actual data that we're progress monitoring. But I can tell you from experience that when you actually look at this with 50 students in it, it's an enormous time saver when you're trying to get a picture of how many students or what percentage of students in that intervention are making adequate progress. What I like to do is click Control and then the negative or minus sign on your keyboard and start to zoom out. And you see there, it's little itty bitty, but what you can do here is just simply count. I mean, if you want to count the number of students, so you can calculate a percentage, but you can get a picture of the entire group looking at that compressed analysis table. Again, what I like to typically do is name intervention 1, say that it's a tier 2 intervention or a group intervention, name all of these the same. And then when I start to see students not make progress and we individualize and intensify, maybe give that student a more intense individualized intervention, we start to keep their data in the next column over. And then just looking at this table, it's easy to see these students are receiving tier 2, these students are receiving tier 3, and then you have different options after that for if you continue to change or modify the instruction or the intervention. So that compressed analysis table, again, is just a big time-saving feature for teams. Okay. And we're going to look at this graph for a second because I'm going to highlight one trip of the system that I just explained. So say we're looking at this graph and the student's trend line is obviously steeper than the aim line. What you also kind of see sometimes is the student, well, let's enter a little bit more data and we can actually see what that looks like. So say that things are stagnant. They even start to trend down a little bit. Okay, so now our trend line is a little bit more flat. Let's see what that looks like on the analysis tab. So you see we have that preserved October where things were green. The trend line was pointing up above the aim line, but now things are stagnating and we are red because we want to be at a 0.07 slope and we're at a 0.02. Okay. What could happen is you might get a baseline of 10, and then 2 weeks later, suddenly the student scores way up here at 20. And then they score moderately in that range after that. Maybe they're trending slightly upward, and we still think that they're going to meet their goal, but they just shot up right after we got a baseline score. Well, I would just, in a lot of circumstances, I think you'd want to question your methods for obtaining that baseline score if the student doubled it on the next assessment. But in any case, you will run across rare occasions where the trend line is pretty shallow, you might say, but the student is still on track to meet their goal. And when you look at the analysis tab, obviously in that situation, you're going to see red readings because the trend line slope is pretty shallow, but the student is still on track to meet their goal. What you're more likely to see is the student pretty much keeping to this line, and they're going to either trend slightly above or trend slightly below, or you might see a student flatline or start to go negative. And in all of those circumstances, iAscend is going to give you an accurate read from that analysis table about how that student is performing. Really, the only trip that you run into is, like I said, when things rocket up pretty soon into your data cycle, and then pretty much are pretty shallow after that, but you're still on track to meet their goal. That's when it becomes apparent that that analysis table, while a huge time saver that allows teams to get a snapshot of the students in the intervention, allows you to prioritize your conversation in a data review meeting. If you've ever had a really brief time to cover a lot of student data, can be a huge time saver. But it never replaces actually looking at these graphs. So when you're thinking systemically and you're building, you've really got to find some time and some personnel to routinely and regularly look at these graphs themselves, because while iAscend has those slope calculations and it can do a lot of work for you, it's not a human being and it doesn't have that eye for analysis the way that a human can analyze this graph by looking at it. Okay, I'm going to cover two more things before I end the video. One is we've been entering all this data into intervention number 1, and I referenced when we were looking at that analysis table that there are a lot of more options. So generally, we'll keep student data in this green column most of the time because the student is receiving that tier 2 group intervention, for example. But say that the student is referred to a problem-solving team and you want to intensify and change the intervention. So we are going to name intervention 2, whatever we decide that intervention is going to be. Maybe we're just increasing frequency and we want to see if that improves the data. So let's scroll down here. And things just start to go really well. So now that we've intensified things, things have improved greatly, and this trend line is just trending very sharply up. So let's look at the analysis table and how that looks. So starting in January when we started that new intervention, we went to green. This is the current slope of 0.2, and it's down here as well. And you see over in the compressed analysis table, that was intervention 1. Now we have intervention number 2, and things are green, which is where we want to be. Now, how do we note that? Well, this notes column is built here for just that reason. So say we met as a team in December and said, and we probably add a little bit more detail, but we're going to make a note that we made a decision to intensify the intervention. So that's what that notes column is there for, kind of documenting the team's reaction to the student's progress or lack thereof. Jumping back to the student data tab, I missed that there's also a notes tab here. The reason why I built that in is because sometimes you encounter aberrant data. For example, like let's just make this a 2. Say that the student was very unengaged in the probe that day, and it's not really an accurate reflection of their progress. We still want to have that data. For one thing, it just indicates that we were doing our due diligence and we actually administered that probe when we needed to, according to the interval that we had established as a team. But say that we don't really want that to show up on the graph. So I'm going to note and I would, again, add more detail to that, but we're just showing that in that notes column, that's where you can take notes on a specific data point. Now, say we don't want that to be on the graph anymore when we review it as a team, because it is mucking things up. It's really pulling the trend line down and influencing it strongly. And again, we really don't think that was an accurate reflection of the student's progress. So we want to be able to see what the trend line looks without it. Let's click on that row, 61. I'm going to right click and hide the row. Okay, and you can see down here, it just says data in hidden rows is excluded from the chart. So let's click on that chart. And we don't see that aberrant data point pulling us down anymore. Right where it was, we just see 17 go into 14, and the trend line is very different. So that's a good way of just as a team keeping your data and not risking deleting it. But when you're analyzing trend lines, you don't necessarily want to view all that data because there are those aberrant data points that can influence your decision making. To get it back, we can just click these arrows right here, and our row comes right back. Incidentally, you can also hide rows that have no data in them if you want to. I don't necessarily do this regularly, but well, let me slow down there. I clicked on the row with no data in it, held Shift, clicked on the row that had no data in it, and it selects all those rows. I'm going to right click, hide rows. And then if I want to, I can do that every single time I enter data. And this big table that covers the whole school year and all the dates is going to shrink down to basically the half the size of this page. So again, if you want to do that, know that it is an option. It's just a quick little tip, but not something that I necessarily do. It's just be aware that is something you can do. And with that, I think I have covered everything that I intended to cover in this video. If you have any questions or comments about iAscend 180, please let me know. I'm going to jump back to the website. My contact information is on here, so please reach out if you have any feedback or questions, or have any ideas for improving iAscend 180, because I'm always looking to do that. Thank you so much for your time. Bye.